Good morning, everybody. Afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Today is going to be absolutely fantastic. My name is Chris Panayiotou, and I am joined by Professor James G, not to be confused with Ali G, but we might go there later, and Amy Price of the English FA. Thank you both. Thank you to everybody who's on with us live. Thank you to everybody who will watch this later. Professor G and Amy, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. So just to set a little background here. So we had Amy Price on digital video games approach, and every time Amy's been on and I've seen Amy's work, which has been absolutely phenomenal, it's been inspired by Dr. James G, Professor James G. So we took this opportunity. I reached out to Professor, and Professor was kind enough to jump on, and I'm sure it's because Amy's presence. Amy is here. She's working on her camera right now, trying to get that on. But I wanted to take the time to get them together and just discuss, and we're going to touch upon good game design today, known as GGD, and we're going to look at the differences between that and gamification. But more importantly, we're going to get an insight into the Professor and Amy's mindset, and how they inspired each other and how things are changing and helping us teach and learn to keep children and people more engaged. So without any further ado, enough talking from me. Professor G, welcome. Tell us about your journey, and then we'll get Amy piggybacked on that.
Well, my journey into games was a complete accident. I was trained as a theoretical linguist, later began to work on more relevant things to do with learning and culture and society. But when I was at the University of Wisconsin in my 50s, I had a 6-year-old child, and like any parent, I was reading to them, and I knew, as a person having studied literacy, I knew that you needed to be interactive when you read to a child. And there were digital books. The books themselves were interactive, so I thought that'd be cool. Got a Winnie the Pooh one, you know, and the kid can click on things and words pop up and down, and it's interactive and great. And then I saw a child's video game called Pajama Sam, Who's Afraid of the Dark. Never played a video game, but I got it for him, and I thought, wow, it was really cool because you solved problems, right? And it was funny, but you solved problems with your kid, and that was cool because there were some things, even at 6, he was better at than me, and there were some things I was better at, and I thought this is really a good thing for cognitive growth. And I enjoyed Pajama Sam, and so I decided I'd go buy an adult video game, figuring this would be a lot of fun. And I didn't know what to get. I got the New Adventures of the Time Machine, probably because of its allusion to H.G. Wells, and took it home and was just absolutely frustrated. I thought, whoa, this is hard, it's long, it's impossible. Why would anybody pay for this? This is supposed to be fun. And but I stuck with it and didn't do very well and made some very bad baby boomer mistakes. For example, I read the manual thinking it would teach me how to play the game. Very stupid thing to do. You don't read first, you read second. You do first. And as I stuck with it, I know several things hit me. One was, wow, I used to think of myself as a good learner. But like many old people who are an expert in something, I haven't actually learned something wholly new for a long time. The muscles were atrophied. And pretty soon I said, you know, this is exciting the way it was learning in graduate school because it's new. And I'm getting to be a better learner all of a sudden again. And that's cool. Then the other thing that hit me is that I had already done a lot of work on in cognitive science about how humans learn best. The field was making a lot of discoveries because of neuroscience. And I saw that the video games incorporated good learning and teaching principles. They're the same ones you had in cognitive science, but schools didn't. And I thought, wow, that's really mystifying. And the third thing I realized is now I'm addicted to games. I'm going to play them. I still do. I play them hours every day. And if I don't write about them, I won't have a career anymore. So I sat down and wrote about them. It was a lot of fun. I had no idea anybody'd read the book. But the timing was perfect because the industry was just going from a niche industry to a more mass industry and wanted some old academic to say video games were good. So the book sold well. changed my career. I ended up dealing with business people and military people and all sorts of people I never would have dealt with. So it's been a fun ride, but it's a total accident.
Amazing. Absolutely brilliant. And there's a few things we'll loop back to and visit. But Amy, do you want to share your journey and your story, and then how your work's been influenced by The Good Professor?
Well, first of all, I can't believe I'm actually on a webinar talking with James G, because I feel like I've said that name for so many years. And now I actually get to talk to you, James. So it's pretty amazing. So thanks, Chris, for setting it up. I definitely haven't got as much of an interesting and insightful story to tell related to why I'm here today. I started off in quite a big family with 3 older brothers and then another 2 brothers when my dad remarried. And I was just used to a competitive environment, playing lots of games, whether that be on the computer, whether it be outside playing sports. And I think that's, looking back now, I think that's where it stemmed from. You know, I loved games. I like to just make up games. I think I was quite playful and quite silly sometimes with my brothers and with my friends. I was the silly person that used to try and make up some fun stuff to do. And then I kind of realised when I finished school that I definitely wanted to go into coaching, because obviously I was playing football at an okay level and it was what I loved. And I did my level 1 straight away, sort of went into a local sort of community football scheme, and I left college actually. I didn't finish college. So I came away with no qualifications from college, and at just turned 17, I went full time into a coaching role as an apprentice. And at the time I was earning £100 a week, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. £100 a week, full time, 6 days a week. It was my dream and I absolutely loved it. I did my level 2, and I was also coaching in the elite pathway as well at the time with some young players, which I loved. And then I kind of realised I wanted it to be a career. So I thought, right, I've got to finish college and so that I can go to university. So I carried on coaching part-time and focused on studying, and went to university age 21, graduated at 24. For the first time in my whole life, academia was something I became good at, because I think I realised, you know, well, basically, I think I became better at it because I was studying some stuff that I really enjoyed, which was coaching. And then at 21, I knew I wanted to carry on coaching, so I did, but there wasn't really full-time roles back then. There were, especially in women's football, and it was hard to get into men's football. So I was like, what else can I do where I can still coach? And I became like a graduate lecturer. So I sort of started training to become someone who could teach in higher education. And that was great because it exposed me to so many different topic areas that I probably hadn't paid much attention to before. So I was scrambling away like, oh my God, I've got a module on this. I've got to learn how to do it. Like, I've got to learn all of this stuff. And I was studying for my master's at the time. And it was then at that point which I came across James's work, because I was very much into coaching through games. So in all of my experiences, I'd say up until that point, I was an advocate of games-based approaches when I coached, and I was probably quite obsessed with games, and I wasn't able to see the other methods that were also useful for coaches. And so therefore, because I was this enthusiastic games-based coach, I was like, right, I'm going to do my dissertation, my research project on game-based. And that's when I stumbled across James's work on the internet by accident, because I Googled what is a game. And of course, all of the video game stuff came up, which I hadn't even thought of. And then obviously in reading around that area, I realised there was loads published by James and others. And I was like, wow, this is something that sport hasn't tapped into. How have we been talking about games-based approaches, such as teaching games for understanding from Bunker and Thorpe in the 80s, and stuff even earlier than that, but we've never really looked at video games as a way of informing how we coach. So I did a little action research project for my master's, so 2013 to 14, when I was coaching my team in the evenings. I tried to use James's good game design framework with all of the 13 features into my coaching practice. And it was really hard. I'm sure my manager at the time, my boss at the football club, thought I was crazy. He'd never seen coaching like it, and I'm sure I didn't impress him because I was really just trying stuff out. It was like being in a playground. And that was the start, really, of how I've tried to understand James's work and then also build on it and make sense of it into a digital video games approach.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Absolutely love sharing that. And there's a couple of things, common themes that I picked up there from both of you. Obviously, you know, you said you were in your 50s, James, when you were in Madison and you had a 6-year-old. And then, you know, you mentioned fun, right? And then you did say that I made the mistake of reading the manual first instead of doing, right? And then Amy, you came back and you talked about fun. You the playful, the silly one in your family, and in the middle of 3 older brothers, 2 younger brothers when your dad remarried. But the fun aspect came in, and I love the fact that obviously, Professor, you went through the academia route and picked up play later, whereas Amy went through the playful route first and then picked up academia later. And then how, by mistake, as Amy said, I looked up what is a game and up came your work, right? And now here we are, you know, 6 years on from that, sitting, the 3 of us on a webinar, and looking at how people learn. Now, you also mentioned, Professor G, that schools weren't really using good learning principles, right? So now this is a time for everybody to pivot and change and adapt with what's going on in the world. Obviously, I have 3 teenage boys, and their first 9 weeks is going to be online learning. When we look at schooling and we look at learning and teaching, and there will be a question in here somewhere, when we look at learning and teaching, we look at school, we look at the way coaches have coached in the past, and we seem to do it because it's always been done that way. I think now as coaches, teachers, we have a duty and a responsibility to capture, to change, to enhance, to engage children in what we're doing, right? And obviously, I think that the good game design, the digital video games approach are very unique ways where we can get into their world, you know. But to do that, we have to know who's in front of us, right? We have to know who's in front of us and what their goals are. So now, Amy's touched upon how her work, how your work has inspired hers. Let's dig into what does good learning and teaching from video gameplay, how do we apply that in the classroom or on the grass? You know, what are some golden nuggets that either of you can give, and some of the things you found after research, trial and error, and stuff like that? Hopefully that was clear enough after my long rant. I see you nodding. I can't see Amy right now. She might be giving me the read.
I'm nodding.
So, good, brilliant. So James, if you want to go first, and then Amy will.
So let me clarify too first that the approach of using game-based learning does not mean you have to use the video game. It means you use the learning principles that are in a video game. Now, one thing that really, you know, when I wrote the first book, came out in 2003, the first group that asked me to give a talk was in a law school. There were law professors. And I said, what the hell could the book have to do with law professors? You know, they teach in American law schools in the Socratic method. It's nothing like what's in my book. And I went and gave the talk, and I asked them, why did you invite me to give a talk? And they weren't concerned about the classroom. They were concerned about their clinic. Like many law schools, they had a place where the young lawyers in training went out and worked with poor people in a clinic to actually do law. And they said, you know, in the clinic, people have to actually do something. And your approach is based on people doing things. You know, school as we have it, and the literature on this is replete, it can make people good at writing down answers. So, for example, you can, if you've taken physics, you can write down Newton's laws. But people have shown that most people who can do that cannot use the very laws they can write down to solve problems, right? so school, and this is one of the reasons the world's so screwed up, is we're not good at solving problems. Now, if you're in a clinic in law school or in your field in soccer or in a video game, you have to solve a problem, right? So it's got to have learning that is not just based on fact retention. And now, so let me give you an example of why I think this approach is good for sports. There's a unique thing about a video game. It's embodied. So when you're playing soccer, you're playing with your body and your mind. In a video game, very weirdly, you have a surrogate body that you control, and the literature shows this really does a thing to people's brains. They think they're half in the game and half out of. That's why kids, when they're playing Mario and Mario jumps, they jump. Furthermore, if let's say you're playing a game like the early Warcraft where you're in a team of 5 people, you're in a team. Everybody on that team has to have very different skills. You don't come in with all the same skills because it's built in such a way that each person has to have separate skills that can coordinate those skills with the other people to solve a problem that no one skill can solve. That's true of soccer as well. Now here's a little story. I was a priest. That means I was supposed to heal people and buff them and help them, not kill other things or do stuff. Other people played that role. And that meant I had to monitor the 4 other people and sometimes more and figure out at each moment while we're in the middle of action, what does that person need? What should I do? And I had dozens of commands, dozens of things I could do. So, you know, if you're sitting there thinking it out all the time, you'll fail because it's got to be done quickly. And I was getting good at this. I enjoyed it, but all of a sudden I realized there's a thing I just am not doing right. I don't know what it is, but I wasn't succeeding the way I should. Now, many of the players in this game will have what they call an alt. They will have their skill set, but they'll have played another skill so they can understand it. And a guy who was much more better at the game and played longer, who was not playing as a priest, but had played as a priest, knew about it. At an exact moment, he came up and he said, look at this right now on the screen. Look at where the opponents are. Look what's happening. This is where you use skill X. He named a skill. And he said, here's why you use it at this moment. And here's what will happen if you don't. And all of a sudden, the whole thing clicked. I understood what my problem was. What was he doing? He taught me in real time how to pay attention, what to look for, what it meant. It's just in time information that can be used. And yet it reorganized all of my view of being the priest. Now, that is the same thing you would do in soccer. I played soccer. I told you earlier, I played a lot of sports. I coached some sports. I absolutely hated soccer. I never understood it. This was in the days when Americans didn't play it a lot. And I realized my problem was, you know, as I was one of the people standing in front of the goal, waiting for all the people to run down with their cleats, and I was supposed to run up and kick the ball and get it away. And I thought, wow, this seems suicidal. I didn't know how to look at it. I didn't. If somebody at that moment had said to me, okay, look now, pay attention to that. This is when then it could have transformed it, but I had nobody to do that. So I didn't have I didn't know how to pay attention. See, so those are the fact that it's not surprising that the principles that make for good video game play, where it's an embodied play and often team play, apply to not only sports, but where you want somebody to not only think, but to do, and eventually make thinking automatic. Because like in dance, you can't think of every step while you're doing it. And but in school, you don't have to do that, because as long as you memorize the equations, you can solve the problem on paper.
Super. Amy, can you follow
Yeah,
that?
loads and loads of stuff that sprung into my mind as you made comparisons between all of those different examples there. So I guess something that I've been thinking about a lot over the years when I've been reading your work, James, is is when you play a video game, it's not dictated to you most of the time. It's not anyway. It's not dictated what you will be learning when you decide to play the PlayStation or play Mario Kart. You play the game. And I was thinking about coaching soccer. Got me calling it soccer now, coaching football. And all of the exposure experiences I've had in formal coaching settings has been that we should decide what the players will learn today, and we should focus our session on something to do with the game. You know, passing, dribbling, shooting, defending, whatever it is. And that's kind of, I guess, through coach education, how we've all been trained to design practices, to come up with coaching interventions and good questions and stuff. And that was a real stumbling block for me on this when I was trying to interpret your work into the video games approach, because I knew that would be conflicting for many coaches and teachers, because we're driven by objectives and outcomes. And I thought, right, how can we just help players to focus on playing the game so that they can practice those skills you mentioned there, James, around being aware, noticing some stuff, paying attention to what's actually happening in the game, because the game isn't always the same. It changes all the time.
Right.
And as a result of that, that's kind of where the whole mission thing comes in. You know, it's definitely a video game word, but you know, missions for me, instead of the objectives or the outcomes or the topic of the session, is a good starting point, I hope, for players to just play the game, knowing what they've got to achieve in the end. You know, I always use the example, I'm a massive Mario fan, as everyone knows, and it's real simple in that, like, you just need to save the princess. The princess is being kidnapped, you need to save her. So imagine if we could just make sometimes missions for players. Just the goal. This is the end goal. How you get there is up to you. So actually, it reinforces that idea that you said, James, around skills.
Right.
So, you know, I need to know when to use this skill for that reason and when not to, depending on what my strategies are to achieve this mission. And again, like, strategies will change. I know 100% when I play Mario. I've got Mario Deluxe at the moment, and so I'm always changing my approach. I'm always trying out something else which requires a different set of skills. And I think for me, that was the start point on this video games approach stuff. And it was tough because, you know, as I said before, as coaches, we are programmed to have really set objectives and outcomes that we try to work towards with our players.
Can I say something about that? I mean, it's really...
Please go ahead.
So, Amy, you've hit on a very important point. When the game-based learning stuff now is very robust. I mean, there's tons of books, tons of people doing it, because the gamer generation academics took it over. It was the old approach to learning was the objectives. You know, came out of instructional technology, and it's you take the skills. You order them from the simplest to the more, you practice each one in order, and then you get to play the game. Now, we were arguing for a very different view of learning, and that is what I would call level design. What is this? A game never starts, of course, with its hardest level. It takes a level where the things are simplified a bit, but where the skills you're practicing are still in the context of a game. Right? Because you have to learn how to do skills in context and sometimes in connection with other skills. You can't just put them in a little ladder, practice them out of context, and hope that in context they will gel. So level design just says, like, somebody should have put me when I was playing football. I should have put me in a level that was just practicing people running at you, and me being trying to get the ball to somebody else, right? You simplify it. Now, by the way, it's still context. It's soccer. I mean, you're still doing it. And then when I succeeded, there should have been a little boss battle. that tested that not only I was good at it, but that I could innovate it. I could think now. I'd learned enough to move to the next level, and then put me in another context in soccer. So level design says you simplify it so that skills can be practiced in context. You test that they've been achieved so that when you ramp them up, you can get to a higher level. And that's a very different view of learning. You're never out of the game, but you certainly don't throw people into championship soccer when they played like me, right? So that's like starting with the hardest level.
Yeah, and it's definitely something again I've been working on with level ups, because I think it's really tough in soccer, you know, because as you said, it's we're doing it, we're actually playing it. It's hard to control, and I've tried to look at time, space, and numbers, as in numbers of players, as 3 factors which could dictate like the complexity of a level, and it's really tough. I think this is where coaches, probably between missions and levels, is probably the areas where as coaches we find it difficult to design, because it becomes the most challenging part of game design. But it's, like you said, it's very important, and I'm thinking back to games-based approaches that have historically been used in sports coaching, and you know, like the classic teaching games for understanding. It's been around for a long time. You know, there's other ones as well, like Game Sense, Australia.
Right.
It's like you say, game-based learning has been around for a long time. I'm just not sure how much emphasis has been placed upon complexity and levels. I know complexity is actually a pedagogical principle of TGFU, but I don't think it's ever been described in the way that you describe level ups, with being that explicit about, you talk about feedback and the importance of the feedback being really obvious, that I've actually just solved that problem and that solution worked, and at the next level I'll need to use that solution probably again, but just in a more complex way, or maybe in a trickier situation. And I don't think it's ever really been described like that.
Well, there's an important principle of learning that with human beings, because we are such pattern recognizers and we're so creative, that if you get a person to start with a relatively hard problem, they will find a creative solution to it, but it may never work again on even easier problems. So you want to start with the person with a problem that they can solve eventually, but it has what I call legs. It will apply again and again. You can add to it, it'll be better. Otherwise, you're sending a person down a garden path. They seem like it's good, and then all of a sudden it just doesn't work. The other thing that Amy's hit on is if you're going to explore the level, that is, let's say you put me in that little thing where people ran down, and first of all, you'd want to tell the other players they should do what the other guy did for me in the video game. They should say, look at this now. You know, the players should be coached, or the better players should be in a coaching role. But the key point too in games is failure can't, if you have a view that failure means you're no good, which we get from school, you can't use it as a form of learning and exploration and hypothesis testing, which is what it's got to be. Anybody playing a video game or sport who thinks that failing that means you're a bad player is missing the key learning thing in any of these things, which is failure is a form of learning.
Yeah, so we actually like to use the word fail and use the acronym first attempt in learning.
Good.
Right?
Excellent.
And just to unpick what you guys are saying here, if we look at coaches, I think we are fixers. Most of us are fixers. And if you look at any game, regardless of the coach is looking probably mostly where the ball is. And Amy, you can agree here or disagree, but I think as coaches, we look at where the ball is, as opposed to engaging with the players on the sideline and asking them, hey, what are you noticing? What did you see? And we seem to be, if anybody's seen the movie The Bug's Life, so and the flies keep flying to the zapper. And he says, stay away from the light. Well, I can't because it's so beautiful. But that's what we do with the ball. We don't take enough time at times to step back and ask players that aren't playing, hey, what are you noticing? What did you see? And what I've started to incorporate more and more in our training sessions is we do like scouting missions. So James, if we're in that gauntlet that you spoke about, you and I are playing one-on-one and somebody else is playing one-on-one. Now we're switching over. So now I've got to go report to the player that's going to play you next what I noticed about your play. Well,
That's
James
good.
was very aggressive. He came in and
Yeah.
so we're asking children to be more intentional, to be focused, to give them
Absolutely.
opportunities to level up and use contextual techniques and skills in the appropriate time.
Perfect.
Right?
Perfect.
Without just saying, sorry, go on, Amy.
Sorry, Chris, I was just going to add to that. And imagine if, like, I guess the utopia in that situation would be that players don't need to be prompted to start to talk about the attributes, the skills of others in the game, of themselves, and and rather than maybe the coach being the person that facilitates or designs that particular learning experience, maybe there's a way that if the game is designed in a certain way, maybe the natural mechanisms of the game design help them to realize, oh, actually, I think I should go and talk to so-and-so and find out what so-and-so skills are, because I realize this is going to help me to level up or overcome the next challenge or the next problem that I'm about to face. And I think that's the key. I think that's the key, because, you know, at the end of the day, when the kids who play soccer and even adults, when they play in competition, there isn't the coach to facilitate these learning experiences. It's, you know, they are playing without an adult helping. And look, it's a big ask, isn't it? Because as James already said, like, these skills aren't taught in schools as much as they probably could be potentially. So it's tough.
Yeah, let me ask a question about this, because I don't know much about coaching. Is if in a video game, a team-based game like, let's say, Dota 2, it's very characteristic that the players are not just in the game, but that they are in what I've called an affinity space. They go outside the game to websites or even real sites and get help from others. So, for example, if I'm playing Dota 2, I can go into a site where I can watch other people play with annotation or without it. I can ask for another player to come into my game and coach me in real time. I can go to sites where people are discussing strategy and even giving models for it. Right. I can get or I can get a didactic tutorial, or I can be put into like chess problems. I can be put into specific problems with people show. So I have a whole community of people who some of and it on these sites. Some of the people are absolute experts. Some are beginners. Some are in the middle. It's not age graded, and they're there to facilitate people's interest or passion in playing. So if does such a thing exist for soccer, an affinity space? Can I go to a place and get a good soccer player to come in and coach me? Can I get games annotated by somebody real time? Can I ask questions that are playing? Is there that stuff?
I think there's probably stuff, but I don't think it's stuff that necessarily is promoted that explicitly or actively towards players. You know, like that they can go on FIFA and learn some stuff about football on FIFA. They can watch games on YouTube, and they can hear from coaches. You know, coaches can talk on
that
like,
certainly
platforms.
Should be used, because it makes the person not a member of a larger community, not just one team, who sees their role in eventually as they get better in teaching others and helping others and making it a passion and interest.
That's a really big thing in football here in England, like of the last few years, really, is performance analysis. And there's some very good platforms like Huddle and Coach Logic where it's promoted for players to comment on each other's performance, their own performance, and with the coach as well. Like, that's great. I think as well what you've highlighted, James, there is the importance for coaches to utilize different approaches different methods to coach,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
you know, a games-based approach is fantastic, and it has a lot of benefits for learning, as we've discussed. But maybe sometimes some other methods do have those benefits as well, just different.
Sure.
So, you know, it might not always have to be practicing in a game. Sometimes we might need to practice away from the game. And I think as well, like in the digital video games approach, the pause button, like obviously pause is one of those 5 principles, and I think that's really cool, because you get to have an insight into the player who's decided to pause. So why have you paused now, and what do you want from this pause? And then they can start to make those decisions around, well, actually, I've paused because I want the coach to tell me some stuff, or I've paused because I want to make this challenge harder, or whatever it might be.
Sure.
Yeah.
And again, that's not common in coaching. You know, it's not. It's usually the coach that's in control of the pace of learning and you know, into coaching interventions, as we would call it.
The coach is usually in charge of that and what's being learned, right? And this is what you spoke about earlier, Amy. I recently did my American USSFB license. I got my UEFA one some years ago and decided to do my American one. And the methodology they are using now is orientation, learning, implementation. So basically what happens is the coach, I come in and I set the problem for the group. And I work with the opposing group to make sure I'm getting what I want and setting the table for the problem. And then I only deal with them in a command style during orientation. Then in the learning process, after using facts and not going on feelings, I say, okay, I bring in the group that I'm working with, which is the learning group, and I say, what did you notice? What were the issues? Did you notice that 7 times we didn't get through because they were compact? And then we move into the learning phase where you run the same activity, but now I'm working with the group that's learning. And then we move into implementation of solutions to the problem, which is also, a different method, a new method. But it's also still very coach-led, because the coach is the one doing the noticing, setting the problems, and stuff like that. I heard yesterday on a podcast that creativity can be killed by criticism, right? Creativity can be killed by criticism. I think in video games, we get instant feedback, right? So if you're on Mario Kart and you're going to rescue the princess, or sorry, not Mario Kart, if you're playing Mario or Sonic and you take the wrong jump and you jump on the spikes, you get instant feedback and you're dead. You learn from that. So how can we, without killing anyone, right, put those principles within coaching and teaching where it's not life and death situations per se, or costing goals and this and that? How do we put children in those situations where they can use that mistake, which was a stepping stone to learning? How do we do that better, to better engage? If you guys can unpick that question, that was very
well, in a video game, where you take a boss, what is nobody who plays video games, if they can beat the boss easily, is going to play the game. They don't want, the whole point is the boss is supposed to be a challenge and kind of thrilling. So you're not surprised that you lose to the boss, right? But what you demand from losing from the boss is that you learned something that will make you pretty confident. You might not win the next time, but you'll do better, right? If you lose so quickly and so thoroughly with no feedback, then it's frustrating. So it's not criticism. What it is it's getting feedback that says you did good on this. You need to work on this particular thing. Let's do that now. And it's okay to fail again. All the players demanding is that the next time I feel confident to try again because I learned something. Failure where you learn nothing. Even with the spike thing, you learned the spike was there, right? So, but the point is, you got in really good bosses. The other thing is that you need to, sometimes a boss, and they're before this, we can automatize skills. that work really well in most cases, but then there are certain situations where going on automatic pilot, you need to change. You need to try something different. And the boss often takes a skill that you're pretty good at from the previous level and says, well, you're going to have to undo this the way you made this routine, and think about it again and add something to it. Get it a little more nuanced. Then you can black box it again into routine. And so it is important that people don't just keep doing the same thing. One of my problems as a baby boomer is when I was failing at a game, I just did the same thing again and hoped it would work until my then, 7-year-old said, Dad, why don't you try something different this time? And I said, well, that's a good learning principle. If you're not working, open the black box, try it again, and then take it a rank up, and then practice it enough to get it routinized. And then later you'll have to do it again. That's how you cycle up. It's been called the principle of expertise, by the way, that experts always look for a situation where their routine mastery doesn't work so they can ramp it up.
I love that. Amy?
Yeah, so as James was talking there, I was thinking about the idea of goals. And, when you're in a football situation, whether it's an actual competition game or whether it's a game-based training session, how often do the players know, or how clear are they in their own heads around what their goals are? Because often players either just think it's about scoring more goals than the opposition, like literally, or not losing, or is it just the goals that the coach has said, i.e. we are practicing on passing today and we need to try and make X number of passes before we score, or whatever it is. So I wonder just how many times players actually create their own goals in their own mind when they're playing. And I think if we can help players to be better at generating goals in a game, I think that's a good start point, because then they're actually more actively looking for that feedback in their own head that the game is giving them. So for example, if I'm in a game and I've noticed that I keep finding myself 1v1 against you, Chris, and that's not good because I'm not very good at 1v1s and you're really good at 1v1s and I feel quite isolated, then that might help me to form a goal. Okay, well, my goal now is to try and figure out what you're good at so that I can then play slightly differently, tweak my game to cater for your strengths, or to nullify your strengths. So that's just me in my own head. That's just me. Like, I'm still taking part in the team game and like still working with my teammates to try and, score more goals or whatever the coach wants us to work on. But I'm just creating my own goals as I'm playing based upon what's actually happening. And, I start, because of that, I then start to really pay attention to what you do, what you like to do, how you prefer to play, what foot you prefer to use, your movement, your positioning. And I'm starting to pick up on this, and maybe my goal is, right, I'm going to use that information now. I'm going to use that as feedback to as I said, to nullify you, to allow it to stop you from doing what you want. And I think that's the start point. And you know what? I think the best players are constantly in any one game creating their own goals in their mind, finding feedback that will help them. And then once they've achieved it, they'll create another goal. And some players will have more than one goal going on in their heads at any one time. And it's constant. If you think it's a 90-minute football match, I might have tens of goals during that game individually in my head, and some goals might link to my teammates. It might be I might be a central midfield player, and a goal that I've got in my head might actually link with my like partner in central midfield, for example, as well. But that's the start point. And then you'll start, I think, then if we can coach players and be more explicit with helping them to not just create goals, but to utilize appropriate processes and strategies to find the feedback and to use the feedback from the game, we then will have players who are more flexible, better at knowing when and why to utilize certain skills.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think it goes back to James was talking about the priest in the game and having to notice, right? So can we automatically put in, obviously you just said one-on-one against Chris, I'm looking, I'm taking in what the environment's giving, I'm taking in what Chris is doing to see if I can achieve my goals. But now if I can incorporate somebody else who's noticed the struggle, can the priest per se within the game help us out, and can we isolate and go 2v1 and stuff like that? But it all comes back to, right, how we are designing our games, how we are incorporating the players and the children that we have before us. So having to know a little bit about where they're from and a little bit of their backgrounds, but also knowing what their needs are, what their wants are, and then balancing all that, right? Would that be a fair statement?
See, I think that's crucial. About, one thing about human beings is they learn best by when they're having an experience, but not from any old experience. They learn when that experience has an action they have to take, they have a goal, and they care. They are effectively care about the goal. So in a video game, the designer has certain goals that are the designer's goals, and the player must adopt them. But the designer knows the player is not going to adopt those goals if he or she doesn't care about it. If something doesn't, and you have to make it matter, and you have to make them understand and be able to put those goals in their own story. Now the game designer also realizes people are motivated to form their own goals, and so they usually will allow you to make your own goals and solve them in different ways, as long as they're in the structure of the goals of the game. And this gets to be very motivating. The other thing that is gamers realize goals are important. You have to care about them because they direct your attention, but you have to be willing to rethink them. You see, baby boomers like me were trained that smart people go as fast and efficiently to their goal. If you're faster and more efficient than me, you're smarter. Video game players would say, nope, you want to think laterally, not just linearly. You want to try multiple ways. It's not about time, it's about the process, and you need to rethink your goals. Now, think about how we got into the Iraq War. We just rushed with one goal, got there, never rethought it. It was a disaster. A gamer would never have done that. So that's why we should stop electing baby boomers, right? Because the world is a dangerous place. People want to and should say, it's not about time. If you took 2 years longer to become a great athlete than me, no one's going to say, well, you aren't as good as him because it took you longer. Same if you nobody's ever said of a Nobel Prize winner, he doesn't deserve it. It took him too long to learn physics. So the gamer attitude of think laterally and not linearly, rethink your goals, set some of your own goals, learn to contextualize the goals you have to do in something that's highly motivating to you, is both a good principle for sports, but also for political leadership.
I know very little about political leadership, and anyone who knows me will laugh at that because it's so true. But something that I love what you're saying there, James, is around time and speed.
Yeah.
So in soccer, of course, it's very hard for players to find time because it's a key factor of the game. And okay, some of the best players might be able to control the tempo of the game quite well, but in general, it happens quite quickly for everyone. So, but I agree with you in the terms of training. In training, it's
I'm
really
saying
important.
It doesn't matter how quickly you become a good player. It matters that you engage with it. And so using time as a measure of failure, which we often do, or saying somebody's gifted, because they did it quickly. Usually it's because they had more practice elsewhere, right?
Yeah, so I'm in agreement with that. So like a challenge we might face as coaches is that training sessions are perceived that they have to be high tempo all the time, or everything has to happen fast. But from my perspective, if we're talking about players creating goals and being thoughtful in their process of how to solve that and how to monitor whether those solutions have actually worked, and if they haven't, to try something different, then we have to be okay with slowing practice down as coaches, and we have to be quite deliberate with if our session is aiming to develop players' strategic understanding or strategic thinking or whatever, then we need to be okay with, okay, this session is going to be a bit slower. There'll be times where players themselves will come out the game, they'll pause, they'll come out the game, they'll have a chat, they'll rethink some stuff, they'll go back in.
Yeah.
It might speed up, it might slow down, but for me that's absolutely massive, because like you said, you want in the end for players to become automatic. But there's a lot of work that has to be done before somebody can be automatic in their thoughts.
There is, and you also don't want them to automatize a mistake, right? So some people go very fast, but they've automatized a mistake and they're never really doing what they could have done. People are different, and people have had, one of the terrible things about schooling is we ignore the fact that you might have had a lot of math at home and pretend you're starting at the same point that somebody did have a lot of math and you had none. And you get a C when you made far more progress than the guy with the A. You don't want to do that in sports, because sports were supposed to be a domain where you're under your own control. You're not doing it to please some authority figure like in school.
Yeah, I think that's huge, and I think you touch up there about the progress of one child in math compared to another, and in the coaching realms we use that as Mostyn's slanted line theory about measuring yourself against yourself. So if I could do 400 juggles, keepy ups, and Amy could do 1,000, and then Amy gets to 1,200, but I get to 800. Yes, she's got 400 more, but I made a 100% increase.
Absolutely.
And I think,
but in school, when the term ran out, because we grade by time, you'd still get a less grade than her.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's part of the industrial teaching, right? And we get these standardized tests, especially here in Virginia, that every child is judged towards. But I think the key point there that you made, James, is, in reality, we're picking up children from different bus stops and dropping them off at different bus stops.
That's right.
And that's what we have to consider within our sessions and stuff like that. And, I love what Amy said there to the game, where a child can remove themselves from the game. We put in, maybe about 8 years ago, I would incorporate a 5x5 grid where a child can come out of practice, take 2 minutes, whatever, to think and reassess. If things aren't going well, if things are going great, take a few breaths, reconnect, get in the present, and then get back into the game when they felt ready. So, we've done a few things like that. And, I love what you guys have both said around goals. I think sometimes we have to be rigid with our own goals, but flexible on how we get there.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And you got to get buy-in on your goals. You just can't think I got the buy-in because I said it.
Yeah. And you have to do the steps to get there. Right?
Yes.
We have to hold ourselves accountable.
Trust is one of the big ones. In games, the gamer is willing to put up with any level of challenge as long as he trusts the game is fair.
Yeah.
If he thinks it's loaded against him or it isn't fair, then it's not a good game. And the kid has got to trust the coach that it's challenging, but it's fair. It's not loaded against me. One thing I worry about in sports, and I'm not, this is now speaking as a rank amateur, but I remember years ago when women's basketball was just beginning. I used to have a girlfriend that played basketball at Stanford, and the girls game.
Your wife's behind you.
Oh, I
I'm
know.
just kidding. I'm
That's
just
right.
kidding.
She is fighting. So, but I'd go to those games, and since it wasn't like a big league sport, it wasn't, the women just played, first of all, really like a team. They had great joy in it. They helped each other. Then you go to the men's basketball game, and it's all about who's better and worse, and who's going to get publicity, and who's going to get to the big leagues. And it didn't have the joy in it, and it didn't have the teamwork. And now women's basketball, of course, is a much bigger deal. And so I think that I don't like seeing people make sports into the same sorting mechanism we have in school. There's the A players, the B players, and who needs a C player. I think that sport, and this is what people do with video games when they're not playing sport out of them, it should be teams. It should be joy, and we should revel in making each other better.
Yeah, I agree. I think we need to have as many children playing for as long as possible in the best possible environments.
Right.
And I think it was Horst Veen, the old Dutch football coach, said that a child's football experience should be like their shoes. It should fit them and be comfortable.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
That's good.
Amy?
Just something for me to add there. Like, I understand, like, Chris, you were talking about like goals created by the coach, and you were saying about the flexibility. You want players to be flexible in trying to achieve those goals. I definitely agree. But how often do we, as coaches, even try to understand what goes on in somebody's head, in a player's head, as they are trying to be flexible and generate their own goals in order to reach the goal? I don't think enough, again, comes back down to just slowing down. Like,
Right.
how are we going to get into their head? How do we? Because that's where we can really start to help and support players with that process.
Yeah, and I love that. And there's a couple of things that we do within our curriculum. So we play a little game called walking football, right? So the children are only allowed to walk. And then I ask them, what are the things you notice when you walk? Well, it was difficult to walk here, and it was but things seem slower. And we do things like we break down skills, and we ask them to teach other players, but in slow motion. So it'd be like, watch me. So we get them doing a little bit of that. But the reason behind the walking football is, what we found is, when they have less to think about, as in running, doing, kicking, marking, their communication gets better, right? And they seem to notice that as well. Oh, well, we were talking really well, I was moving slower, and then we go back to the running or jogging per se, and then we'll give kids like Amy a superpower, and then we'll say, okay, you have the ability now to pick James's kryptonite. So I say, James, you're only allowed to walk when you're defending. So now you've got to think about, how can I get in position? I have to run when I'm not defending, and stuff like that. But it's just different ways through games design or constraints or affordances to get players thinking about their own goals, and then creating and thinking about how they can handicap somebody else per se. Thoughts?
Sounds great. Sounds great. Yeah. I wished I had you as a coach.
Oh, thank you.
For my soccer. I might
It's
have
not
become.
too late.
I
Just
know.
so you know,
Can 72-year-olds play football?
there is a walking league in China,
Yeah.
and it's 80 plus, James. So you haven't made the cutoff yet.
Okay.
But,
Good. Excellent. It's perfect.
yeah. Amy, over to you. We're getting close to time, but I want to be able to have Amy ask some questions that, after reading Ali's papers, that you can ask him now, and pick his brain. There's no questions coming from our live audience right now. I think they've just sat back, and this is, I wanted an organic conversation, and this has been it's been brilliant, and I've loved picking both of your brains. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Amy and to the live audience to see if they have questions, and then I'll man that chat box. But Amy, you've got the professor on.
Can't believe it. It's madness. It's madness. Yeah, I guess something that that the conversations I often have with coaches about this stuff is you know, coaches are really keen on learning about a video games approach because usually because it's fun or it's enjoyable or it's the kids will love it, and I think that's great, of course, and that I think our conversation has highlighted that, but it's not, in my opinion, the video games approach was not designed just to be fun and enjoyable. It was to promote good learning. It was to help players to be more metacognitive in their thinking and more strategic. And the word gamification flies around a lot in relation to this. And I guess I just wanted some thoughts from your perspective on this, James, in terms of the differences.
Yeah, so first of all, let me say I don't think the goal of play is fun. When you're playing a video game and when you're playing a sport, it's not always fun. Sometimes you're frustrated. What it is always is engaging. What we're after is engagement with the body and the mind. And engagement at that level is thrilling to people. They keep going, even past frustration. Gamification is a thing that came out of business originally, where they wanted to use some of what I would consider the more superficial aspects of games, like scoring, leveling up and things, achievements, badges and stuff, to motivate people to buy stuff. And there's a lot of books on that. It then got used for some very good purposes to motivate people to do good things, like activism, right? There's some very good examples of it. But what it essentially is doing is combining some principles of how games motivate players to keep going with principles in psychology, very old ones, about how to persuade people. And so we can persuade them to buy a car. We can persuade them to integrate a community by doing these things. And there's nothing wrong with it. We're talking about, though, with game-based learning, using not just games, using everything you have, but actually saying, how do human beings learn? We're not, donkeys. I have a farm. I have donkeys and pigs. They all learn, but they learn in a different way. And if you don't know what a donkey is and you try to teach it in ways donkeys can't learn, you will get kicked. But the same is with humans. We know from research, humans do not learn the way schools are structured. You guys have been talking about humans. You coaches you guys at least have a good idea of who you are teaching, and that there's certain things you've got to do, and you've talked about them. And so the game-based learning says these games, partly because they're hard, they're frustrating, they're long, have to appeal to how humans learn. Because when humans learn, think about this. Human learning is as pleasurable to a human being and to a young person as sex. But school kills that pleasure. Video games bring it right back. If we taught sex in school, no one would have children, right? So we're talking about humans enjoy learning. That's why they like sports better than school, why they like video games better than school. It's our opportunity to develop human beings, because it's the one place we can treat them like the creatures they are and work on these principles that motivate them to be more flourishing human beings.
Yeah, I think
very well explained.
I think the thrill of sports there, Amy, right? The thrill of sports, the uncertainty of outcome,
sure, absolutely.
Is huge. And I think you touched on something huge there. We keep talking about human beings. We've got to remember that they're human beings, not human doings, right, and that children are not mini adults.
Right.
Right, Amy? You were going to say something.
I was just going to say that was for me, that was really, really well explained, because I often have a little bit of difficulty in myself trying to clearly put those differences across. But it's reassuring to hear that we're on the same page, James, in that regard. I just also wondered, in when you first started to put together principles of good game design and the various features of good game design, was there any point in your thinking from a theoretical perspective to utilize some of the ideas of metacognition? Was that an influential part of the process, or
Yeah,
did it not really come into it?
absolutely. It is a thing where metacognition, so things from cognition like cognitive overload. If you make people pay attention to too many things, they are overwhelmed and they get tunnel vision. And therefore you have to worry about that. And metacognition to me just means thinking about your thinking. And strategizing, but what you have to do, and what sports does, and if you put an emphasis on doing, then metacognition's a stage. There's two types of thinking: fast and slow. Fast is where you've routinized it. You're an automatic pilot because you had so many experiences that you've now got it down. Slow is where you are thinking, strategizing, role playing in your mind. See, video game is just an external form of role play. We do that type of role play in our heads all the time. It's called imagination. And but they're supposed to, you do the fast thinking, you do the slow thinking to be able to eventually make it fast. Then a challenge says, stop doing it fast, do it slow again, ramp it up. And it's that part. But the key thing to see is cognition, working cognition has separated cognition from emotion. And we know from neuroscience now, bad mistake. Every time we think, emotion and affect color our thinking and determine the sorts of choices we make and what we do. If you did not have affect, an emotional charge, when you were doing something, you couldn't do anything. Everything would be an equal choice. You just sit reasoning forever. So the fact is, if you don't trigger affect, which in a human being means this matters to me, something's at stake. When you trigger that, they're good thinkers. And you don't trigger that, then when they're in slow thinking, they look stupid. Now, so if you want to get people to fail in school, then you're teaching algebra, make some of them care, even if it's, I'm going to get me to Harvard, and make some of them say, nothing in this matters to me. I don't see what's at stake for me. And then you can sort people. If you made everybody feel something's at stake here, something matters to me, you couldn't get failure. But see, schools need failure because they're about sorting. But sports don't need failure. Not, at least when they're amateur, they don't need failure.
Huge. So this question has come in from Ivan. Ivan, thank you for the question. Ivan's asking, where can I look for further information on both of your Professor G's work and also Amy's work?
Well, in my work, the best thing probably is to Google James Paul G, because there's a lot of videos, so you don't have to read. You could, of course, read my original book, but the videos, there's a lot of videos of me. They're doing it in terms that are a little more entertaining. And so that's what I'd recommend starting.
Brilliant. And Amy, do you want to share your website?
Yeah, so I guess Twitter is probably the best. I don't think if you Google Amy Price, there's definitely not any books that come out, not just yet anyway.
There will be.
Like
there will
be. You know what I can see in the future? I can see a Professor James G and an Amy Price book coming out, to be fair.
Yeah, she'd have to be the first author now because she's the one that's at the cutting edge.
So there you go,
I'll
Amy.
take that.
So Twitter, and then do you want to? I can share with Ivan also the website you shared with us last time.
Yes,
as well.
Yeah.
So brilliant. There doesn't seem to be any more questions, so I'm going to ask you both. Are there some questions that I should have asked you that I didn't? I do want to say thank you both. This has been an eye-opening, educational, fun, and engaging. I'm not forgetting engaging. Conversation for me.
Good. I think the questions are great. I think it's joy to talk to you and Amy because you have your heads on straight.
Thank you. I'm going to record that part and show my wife.
Good. You should. All righty.
Anything for the professor?
There's just one thing. So you remember I said when I first found out about you, I did an action research study for my master's, and I was coaching a girls under 9s team that season, and I was just trying loads of stuff out, like all of your features. I was trying to make sense of them on the football pitch and what that would look like. And something that came out of that was the idea of in a video game, it's, as you said, kind of it's not the physical real world, it's a virtual space. Right. I don't think that's the word you called it, but it's not physically in a real world. So and also it's not always with other people, right, as in face to face with other people. So that was a real challenge that came out of that study. Is okay, how do we get over these facts? And you also mentioned about the idea of, in a video game, different characters have different skill sets.
Right.
Like, Mario Kart, for example, you can choose your kart, like what wheels you want on it and stuff, and
right.
It then
choice
allows you
is
to
important.
Play. Yeah, and it allows you to play the game in a different way. So it changes the way you strategize. Right. And in soccer, obviously, you can't just make those changes as easily, because if my touch is poor, my touch is poor, or if I'm slow, I'm slow. Do you have any advice with regards to how to bring that to life?
A virtual world is, in a video game, is embodied in two ways. One, you're doing things that affect that world and immediately getting feedback. Sometimes you have a surrogate body. But also, as I pointed out, in a video game, you are making choices in a virtual world that you can role play, you can try different things. It's exactly how the human mind works. We use our past experiences less for recalling the past than planning the future, thinking before we act. All a video game is doing is giving you a platform that externalizes that imaginative act, and where you can practice what should I plan in a relatively safe environment. There's certain, now this attitude that in soccer or football that you're slow and I can't change that. Well, every person in a video game has different skills. I'm 72. You could bet that there are some things young players can do a lot better than me. What does that mean? Did I give up? No, it means I learn a new way to do it. So if I'm slow, then I learn how to compensate for that. Video game players do that all the time. Furthermore, look, we all know that unless you're a professional sports player, you're going to play in a team where the skills are different, right? Where people are diverse, and you have to learn. Like in a video game, you have to learn to make use of every player. You can't hire all the best players. And it would be no fun if you could. So, the question, that didn't get asked, that I think we should all ask is, we've screwed up the world so badly, we may have only 20 years left if we don't do something. So we should be asking in school and in sports, since got 20 years left, what should change? What are some of the things, the attitudes that got us into this mess? Now, the thing I like about sports, if it's not about, everybody having to be the best, but about team play, compensating, innovating, boy, those are the skills I wished we had and put into practice earlier. Because we got to start solving problems, and it's going to be team-based, and you're not going to get to pick your team to have everybody the best. You're going to have to get everybody to contribute, like in that little award party. Everybody had. Jim wasn't the best priest, but he was the one you had. So it was highly in your interest to make him good. Right?
And, no, James, I completely agree with your point around, every player has their own unique set of skills, and it's the part of the game is to be able to know when to use those and how to use those.
Yes.
I guess I was just coming at it from the perspective of being able to see the game differently because I have a different set of skills, and that as a result of that, it might actually help me to become even better at problem solving.
Absolutely. Or if you got to give the player the power to trust his own vision and train the vision, but trust that he has a right to perceive the game in a certain way and integrate that into the play. Because that's part of the metacognitive thing. Remember, being talented at this is partly knowing how to pay attention in real time. And that means I've got to be trained in sensation.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Brilliant.
Okay.
James, thank you so much,
for
by the way.
having me.
Thank you.
And I apologize to all the people who had to stare at me and not Amy.
You haven't seen my hairdo.
Bye-bye.
Thank you both. Thank you both. And thanks everybody who will watch this later. And our next guest is Dr. Jean Coté on transformational coaching on August the 13th. So thank you, everybody. Amy, Ali, my main man, thank you very much. And we'll see everybody soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.